It was the 1800s, and the world was filled with change. The mutiny by the Bengal Army was suppressed, and Britain took over direct government of India from the East India Company. Mahatma Gandhi still lived in South Africa, and Rabindranath Tagore had not yet written Gitanjali. In America, the first telephone message was transmitted, and in Britain, the first electric light was turned on. Charles Darwin published Origin of the Species, and the theory of evolution was born. The Civil War ended in America, and slavery was outlawed. Wilhelm of Prussia was proclaimed Emperor of Germany. In Sindh, India, a son was born to the Kripalani family. He was named Lekraj, and he was an ordinary boy. As the years passed, he grew straight and strong, this son of a schoolmaster. In time, he began a business and married and had children of his own. But still, he was an ordinary man. He was a good man, a kind man, an honorable man, but an ordinary man. And the light touched him and entered his mind. Now his mind was already fine and worked well, but when the light came, he saw that there were shadows in the corners, things left there to think about another tomorrow, things unresolved, matters saved for a day when he had time. But he found he couldn't wait until there was time, for this was not a light he could close his eyes against. This light was inside him and had taken up residence. Eviction was not possible. Not that he really wanted to be without the light, but now and then it would probably have been more comfortable. It did, after all, uncover him to himself. And the light lay in front of his mind like a pathway, or a doorway, or a destination. Sometimes it was barely there, only visible if he concentrated, and he taught himself to keep it where he could see it. Sometimes it filled him until it shone out through his eyes, and others began to sit near him to see what would happen. They knew that something would. And for a while he thought the light was him, was somehow his own essence. But in time he learned that the light was not his, though he had one of his own. This light was other, and it came from some distant place where the rules of physics hung balanced, and time meant something else entirely. And he expected it to be indifferent, but it wasn't. He expected it to be hard with knowledge, but it wasn't. He expected it to be implausible and unreachable and somehow threatening, but it wasn't, and it wasn't, and it wasn't. But it did change him. It laid new understanding gently in his mind, and he saw things he never thought he'd see. He learned about eternity and immortality and consciousness. Things that had seemed important no longer mattered, and he gave away his old life and the things that went with it. Those who waited with him to see what would happen knew this was a chance that fate had given them. He spoke of what the light showed him, and they listened. And some of them changed their days so they could listen. For some, there were obstacles and barriers and difficulties, but they overcame them all, and untangling themselves from the expectations of custom, they came. After all, fate was calling. This was an age when women in that land were made less, and decisions about living were never theirs. And so, from among the ones who came with him, he gave administration into the hands of the women. This was a balance rarely seen in those days and in that place. And so they stayed together, and they were held well and safely for more than a score of years, and they learned how to live. They practiced putting matters of the light first, and matters of the world second. And in time, there was no longer difference to be seen between the two. But winds of change were blowing, and in the way of the world in that time, there was the dissension of boundaries and countries and ownership. Anger and chaos had come to the land, and still they stayed, protected somehow. But when change finally filled the land and closed the door to possibility, they quietly left that place. Three had become 300, and they settled on a mountaintop. And the mountain held them safely, for years still being counted. Every day they listened, and in between as well, and what they learned filled the air they moved through, until it became time itself for them. And time upon time he told them that what he spoke about came from the light, and not from him. And again he would tell them, and 1,000 times 1,000, until they reached out their own minds, and made their hearts available. The light sculpted his thoughts and cleaned away the last shadows, and what he learned, he taught. And the most important of all of the jewels that fell first into his mind and then into their hands was connection with the light. And that was the heart of the matter. Now time passed as it does, and ones who had been very young were now less so. But in all that time, they never thought to leave the mountain. But they did, and it was he himself who sent them. There were only 1 or 2 at first, and they were completely untried in the world outside of their world. They had lived most of their years with signposts and secrets uncovered by the light. This was their guide and their template for living. They understood now, without any doubt, that the light was a separate thing from him. It was the song, and he was the singer. They knew that he stood, open-handed and in between, to sing them the song and make the connection visible and available and theirs. Still, as the years passed, he had become more like the light, his own light becoming at once brighter and softer. And they loved him. They didn't want to go. But it was the beginning of something unimaginable to them in that time and in that place. They understood that if they didn't give what they had been given, it would be as though they had nothing. They knew now that, young and unworldly as they were the ones to begin, the ones who must walk into the lives of others, as he had walked into theirs, the emissaries of the light. They went to places of important papers and the men who understood them. They went empty-handed, and they waited on seats that were bigger than they were themselves. The ones they came to see had many appointments, but no one sent them away. Everyone thought that by the end of the day they would simply not be there. People thought they would be frightened because they were young. People thought they would be intimidated because they were innocent. People thought they could be ignored because they were insignificant. But by the end of the day, the young ones seemed older somehow than the people had thought. They didn't seem intimidated, though the chairs they sat in were much too big. And they had waited, undaunted and patient, until they no longer seemed insignificant. And they had such things to say. When they spoke, their eyes were a place where people saw themselves, whole and wonderful. For some who half remembered their own reflection, awareness flew back into their own eyes. For some, it was the first time they had ever seen themselves clear. Some who listened and listened again offered a dwelling, or a room, or a hall. Stay, they said, or come. If it is known that you are here, there will be others who come and listen. And so they went to towns and villages and cities across that land, and spoke of what they knew in a dwelling, or a room, or a hall. In ones and twos they stayed in those places, and, like he had done, they would tell the people who came that what they spoke about came from the light. For still, the most important of all the jewels was connection with the light. That was still the heart of the matter. As often as they could, they went back to the mountain, for some had stayed there, and others had joined them, and he was there. Sometimes, with distance in his eyes, he would tell them of times to come, of people whose names had not even been written yet, in far places they had never seen, where strange language was spoken. And they would smile with him, because they knew he always spoke truth. But in their secret hearts, they were sure it would be others who traveled to those places, to speak to those people. Surely it would not be them, for such things were still a dream of the future. Now more time passed, as it does, and they had become many in that land, and he was always on the mountain in those years. More and more he stayed inside himself, and the light stayed with him. He spoke less now, but love and eternity stood wordless in his eyes. His skin paper thin, and his step slower with age, there came a day when he didn't come out of the room he slept in. He had left his body behind. They came from all over the land. They came to the mountain. They carried their hearts carefully, for fear they would break. They had never thought of a time without him. But losing him never meant they lost the light, for the light was separate and would never finish, any more than time itself would stop. And still, they had a pledge to keep. So wherever they went, they told what they knew, and people came to hear the secrets of time and the reasons for things. And it happened, as it usually does, that the future folded itself into the present, and what he had said in those long past days on the mountain became real. One of them, who had been with him on the mountain when he spoke of the future, turned around in time and found that she had indeed come to a far place, where a strange language was spoken. And when she spoke to the people there, she had someone with her who changed her language into theirs, so they could understand each other. So it began in this new place. Many came, attracted as a magnet is to a lodestar, by hearing about the light. And in this land, they called the light by a different word, and sometimes 2 or 3. But it was all only one, for the light is one. It is always and ever only one, and one it will be called here until the end of this, for then it belongs to all, and names of different language can lie quiet for a while. Now in time and in the way of things, people told people who told people of what they were hearing, and how the look in the eyes of the ones who spoke lifted their hearts. Soon there were places opened so that people could come back, and back again. And when there were too many people, more places were found. And so things grew and multiplied. Time carried them across mountains and oceans to places they had never seen, and the winds of destiny took them to another new land, and then another, and another. There were many more than 300 now, and some of them had never even seen the mountain. They had been born in other lands, speaking other language. They listened to stories of the mountain and the one who had left his body behind, who had loved them so much, even before they were born, and their hearts flew. They would sit, with distance in their eyes and one in their minds. This most important thing was done in silence. Their doors were always open to anyone who cared to listen, and people of all kinds came. Sometimes they would take a large public place and hundreds would come, or even thousands. And so, time has turned again, and it is now. The world is a strange and wonderful place in this age. It is filled with fantastic invention and amazing discovery. It is dimmed by fear and want and anger, and brightened by courage and hope and love. It is full. There is darkness, but it is always shot through with light. And this was light. They brought it with them. They gave it away. People took it into their homes and families, and some of them caught light from one another. Some even stumbled into it like an afterthought, or an accident, or a blessing. Some were touched and changed their lives. Some were touched and changed life for other people. And in the way of the world, they organized it and ordered it and smoothed the edges to make it available and familiar. They focused it on what the world needed and named it things that stirred the heart. Programs were created that covered large parts of the globe, and they were as varied as the people who created them. Some collected peace and reignited values. Others celebrated youth, and still others honored age. There were programs that offered freedom of mind to those who had no freedom, and others that joined land to land in cooperation. A manifesto was drawn from the hearts of people, a plan for peace and happiness and equality. And they came together from far places. They were politicians and artists and business people. They were physicians and spiritual leaders and educators. They were women and they were men and they were every color a human being can be. They came out of love for the world and its people. They came because they heard time calling. They came. Did he know how many people would be touched when he saw the future that day on the mountain so long ago? And how many people are still to come? If we hold the laws of physics up to the light, is it like critical mass? For if it is, and the law holds true, the day may come when just one more person is needed. Just one more soul to tip the balance. One more to make the last weight on the scales that measure light against dark. In that instant, the world could change. And it doesn't have to be someone wealthy and influential. It doesn't have to be someone famous or revered. It doesn't have to be a world leader or the head of a religion. It just has to be someone. And time never stops turning, and the light never ceases. And light attracts light. It comes from many places, from many people. Like a rainbow, it is made of all the colors that exist in the human heart. The colors of generosity and care for the world. The colors of open hands and open hearts. The colors of faith of all kinds. And as time stretches from the past into now, there are sometimes the questions of how and what and why. And so a story was written about a journey that began so long ago in a far distant land. A journey you have now become part of. And you hold it now in your hands. And many still cross the sea and come to that same mountain. Some things have changed. Some things are always and ever the same. It is love for one. It was always that.